Welcome to your weekly astrology overview that we can all collectively relate to for week commencing the 25th of March. I'm going to then go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces in detail, so please stay with me for those too. Now this week begins with a penumbral lunar eclipse, the only one this year in the sign of Libra, so that's very much about how we relate. The sun, of course, is now in the sign of Aries, which is how we initiate. But if we go back to the solar eclipse of the 14th of October last year, that gave us an opportunity to set our intentions around our relationships, but also finding balance and equity in all sorts of parts of our existence, because, of course, the host Libra is very much about those themes. It's also an air sign, so it's about communication. So one of the things we're all going to be asking ourselves is, how did we fare? What was the outcome of that event, which is now being manifested with this lunar eclipse? Now, one of the things that fed into last year's eclipse was the role of Uranus and Neptune. They formed a yod to the event, to the lunar eclipse. Uranus may have been disruptive and Neptune provided confusion. If we haven't been very happy at how some interactions have played out since then, we're really being asked at the start of this week to take those relationships very seriously. So who's draining us? Who do we give a lot to but who we don't get much acknowledgement from? Who doesn't respect our boundaries? Or who are the people who have actually developed a role in our situation in a very significant and positive way? And if that has happened, then of course we can celebrate those individuals. So on the screen now, I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the week at midnight, based on universal time, and you can see the moon has just moved into the sign of Libra. But on the other side of the heavens, you can see we do have a cluster of energy beyond the sun in the sign of Aries, and that includes the North Node, Chiron, which is going to be a massive part of the story on the total solar eclipse, which is upcoming across the 8th and 9th of April. But we also have Mercury. And I want to tell you about Mercury because Mercury is now in its pre-retrograde shadow. It goes into the retrograde itself on the 1st of April. But despite slowing down, it actually forges a really magical link to Neptune right through this week. So you can see that Neptune there is 27 degrees. And what we're going to find is that from Tuesday, Neptune and Mercury are in that semi-sextile, which is very enabling to one another. So essentially, even though we're being asked to be more precise with our communication in readiness for the retrograde, Neptune's saying, look, it's important to still listen to our instincts. Now also, late last week, Venus and Jupiter, the two planets of fortune, forged an amazing alliance. And that alliance continues within 3 degrees through to the middle of this week. So although this lunar eclipse could bring up some painful issues around relationships, we must remember that Venus is the ruler of the sign of Libra, and therefore some good stuff can definitely flow. We can bring into the open some of the more positive developments that have occurred. Also from Tuesday through to Saturday, Venus is going to be forging a very exciting link to Uranus. That becomes exact on Thursday. This sextile pushes us to shake things up a little bit in our approach to relationships, which, to be fair, the penumbral lunar eclipse is going to do anyway, but perhaps by being open-minded. So if there are discussions to be had and you do need to have some profound interactions with certain people, one of the things that we can all put into the situation is a willingness to change, which comes from Uranus. So even if there are some objections raised or some dissatisfactions, if we're prepared to shift a little bit, which is not easy with Uranus in the sign of Taurus, which of course is a fixed sign and can resist that change. But of course in Pisces, Venus is perfectly set, it's exalted, and it flexes beautifully. So if we can look at situations around relationships or money, which Venus rules as well, in a fresh way, with the energy of that lunar eclipse as well, that can be a real ace in this week's developments. But it is true on Wednesday that Venus does go face to face with Black Moon Lilith in the sign of Virgo. Now, Black Moon Lilith in Virgo is not its raunchiest location. This is very much about clean sheets, order, things being really neat and tidy, whereas Venus in Pisces can be very romantic. Is this going to be another tension point in a certain relationship? It will be interesting to see how it plays out. The great news, however, is that by the end of this week, Jupiter and Uranus, which are going to go into that exact conjunction on the 21st of April, begin the closer relationship within 3 degrees. This is going to go on right through to the 5th of May. And even around the 21st of April, Mars is going to be playing a really passionate link in the sign of Pisces. And of course, late last week, Mars made its way into Pisces, where it's going to be broadly for the next 6 weeks. And that's asking us, again, in relation to that lunar eclipse, to really have the passion to dig down into perhaps some of the more emotional and psychological strands around our relationships and also our desires. So we could find ourselves thinking about someone from the past who was important to us. Whether we make contact and there be a reunion is another matter. That's strictly down to you. But Mars could arouse some memories from the past. But equally, it can push us to check over some old wounds that we may have thought that we dealt with, but could still be rattling around in the depths of our psyches. But overwhelmingly, this is a week when relationships are very much to the fore, but it's also very important to understand with that collective of energy in the sign of Aries, this is a time for us to initiate, to begin new strands, or to inject ongoing strands that we enjoy with much greater fire and passion. So a time to really try to find that midpoint between our needs and what we're prepared to give to others. Please stay with me for your in-depth zodiac forecast. Now, if you've yet to sign up for your free daily horoscope, please see the link beneath this video. I've been writing these for nearly 30 years. And by subscribing, you'll get it fired to your device each morning, totally free of charge. But if you would like to ascend above zodiac horoscopes and embrace more serious astrology, if you give me 3 pieces of your personal birth data of time, date and place, I can produce for you your life roadmap report. This will give you stunning insights into the patterns that have played out in your life so far, but also a much more intimate understanding of how to work with those energies future forwards. Also, my special package of 30% off, you can get your 12-month transits forecast. That's the moving planets in the sky interacting with that unique blueprint you were given when you were born. If you've already had your natal chart, why not check out your draconic version? That's your soul chart based on what you brought karmically into the world. The natal chart is how we can develop our potential in this life. Please see the link below for more information. Welcome Aries to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. Starting this week with your ruler Mars having just located into your 12th house is really significant. The 12th house is the part of our situations that's to do with reflection. But Mars, of course, is a hustle-bustle influence. It's impatient and it can be the warrior planet. And the 12th house may be to do with old issues that could come up in a bit more of a feisty way over the next 6 weeks. Now, if you feel at peace with your past, you may be surprised that at times Mars does remind you of hurts or rejections or unfairnesses, but it's an opportunity to revisit those and take a fresh look at them with the knowledge and experience that you have now, and therefore do see this as an asset. Also, if you're wanting to make progress professionally, what you do behind the scenes is still very important to what you do more obviously. Now, of course, with the sun back in your sign, which is absolutely glorious news, along with the North Node and Chiron and Mercury, this is a chance when you can take a firmer grip on your life direction. But don't expect everyone to be absolutely thrilled about that, because the penumbral lunar eclipse could flag up somebody who doesn't quite disapprove of your approach. And since Saturn moved into your 12th house last year, it has been the case that you have slowly but surely been diverging from certain people or situations, and certainly the North Node in particular has really been encouraging you to live in the moment and to grasp your opportunities as an individual. But someone may feel that you've been too single-minded and not been available enough to relate to them. So that is an issue that could come up this week for you. Also, Mercury, now in its pre-retrograde shadow, suggests that when it comes to your communications, Mercury in Aries is a very quick, passionate and fiery influence. And if things don't quite work out in certain interactions as you expect, it may be because of the pre-retrograde shadow, but Neptune's saying in its application to Mercury, really important to listen to your instincts. Now, late last week, Venus and Jupiter, the two planets of fortune, linked superbly, and they are in touch through to the middle of this week. The interesting thing, Aries, is that if you do have some fortune, it may not necessarily just be financial. It's possible that someone's going to celebrate you with a thoughtful text message or email or gift, some flowers, a past acknowledgement of how hard you've worked and how much they appreciate your support. So as much as someone could challenge you this week because they feel you haven't been thoughtful enough, someone else may feel that you've really been absolutely brilliant and want to thank you sincerely for that. But the good fortune could be financial, and that can be played out in quite a swift way as this week goes on, as Venus and Uranus link. Uranus, like Jupiter, in your second house of everyday resources. But this might be something to do with past effort, work, application that you've put in that can come back to you. But if it does, it can be absolutely thrilling. And of course, April is going to see Jupiter and Uranus, as I mentioned in the introduction, come into that exact conjunction for the first time in 14 years. But with Mars influence in that aspect too on the 21st of April, important therefore with your ruler now in your 12th house to be prepared to work behind the scenes as much as in an upfront and more obvious way. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Aries. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd be kind enough to like, comment, share or subscribe, that would be fantastic. Welcome, Taurus, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. The week begins with that potent lunar eclipse, a penumbral lunar eclipse, which for you occurs in House 6. House 6 is very much about the practical dimension. If we go back to the solar eclipse, which occurred on the 14th of October last year, that was encouraging you to reform certain approaches around diet, fitness, health, nutrition, decluttering. Perhaps if your work wasn't proving as fulfilling as you would like, to look at that area too. So as we begin this week, the outcome for the intentions that you set then come sharply into focus. And if something does feel out of kilter between the more practical dimension of your situation and the more psychological, emotional and spiritual area that's occupied by the Sun, you are being asked to take action to try to realign things. And one of the best ways to do that, I feel, is to think about your welfare from a holistic viewpoint. So if you are someone who's very, very hardworking and practical, thorough, reliable, and takes your responsibilities and obligations really seriously, important not to neglect how things feel. Then again, if you're someone who's very much invested in your personal development and very sensitive, not a bad idea to try to become a little bit more grounded. And that could be by doing some extra physical exercise, being more active, and trying to find the balance in that way. But late last week, Mars, the planet of drive and passion, moved into a very sociable part of your situation and is going to be there for the next 6 weeks. But the other thing about Mars in the sign of Pisces, of course, the sign of Pisces is quite psychological itself, but for you, it's asking you to think about your longer term future as much as your more social interactions. But Saturn, of course, has been asking that question in a big way since last March 2023. And in a very subtle but powerful way, Neptune's been doing the same since 2012. And the chances are you have realigned quite a lot since that time. But the recent energy in the sign of Pisces has seen the Sun very close and then alongside in the cazimi with Neptune. So you may have felt a little bit confused about what you really want. And now we've got the Sun along with the North Node, Chiron, and Mercury all in house 12, which is about stopping, pausing, assessing things. You still have got that strident energy coming in from Mars, but at the same time, it's important to stay in touch with how things feel. Listen to your instincts. Let your instincts guide you. Now, Mercury in your 12th house is in its pre-retrograde shadow this week. So that in itself could create a little bit of extra sensitivity, especially if you don't get the responses that you feel you need, or you may find even communicating at all is more arduous. However, Neptune is supportive to Mercury, suggesting if you can stay in touch with your ideals, let your ideals guide the people that you're going to connect to. I think generally speaking, this penumbral lunar eclipse could shake out of your situation some players who've not perhaps been quite so positive for you. But despite that, Taurus, you do have at the start of this week a glorious link between your ruler Venus and Jupiter, the planet of fortune. Now they came into an exact contact late last week, but they are going to be connecting to one another through to the middle of the week. And that suggests that some of the creative things that you've been doing, particularly over the last year since Jupiter moved into your sign, and some of the more daring things that you've applied over the last 6 years with Uranus's support, they can come back to you, particularly by the 21st of April, when Uranus and Jupiter come into that exact conjunction. But they're going to be supported by Mars as well, which in itself is very exciting. So as you come into this week, do believe, despite the fact that you may become more aware of who you can't rely upon so much, if you do feel slightly detached from some people, you're feeling a sense of isolation or psychological sensitivity, do know that there are certain elements of your situation which are looking very positive. And in fact, Venus goes on to apply to Uranus by Thursday. That just points towards being very open-minded about how you approach things. But you could get a last-minute invitation to go out for lunch or on a date, some kind of get-together which proves to be very uplifting. But I think generally the eclipse is just going to remind you of being conscious about the people in your inner world that you can really trust and rely upon. And those solid citizens who are there for you through thick and thin are the people you're going to really appreciate at this time. But if there are some people there who aren't quite so you're not quite so sure of what their intentions are, or you're needing to work with some people that you feel a little bit uneasy around, don't be fearful of setting your boundaries. Thanks so much for having joined me, Taurus. If you've yet to do so, please subscribe, like, comment, or share. Welcome, Gemini, to your in-depth weekly horoscope for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun, or the Moon. Now, the big attention at the start of this week, rightly, is going to be on the penumbral lunar eclipse, which for you occurs in your sister air sign of Libra, and that's house 5. This is where we showcase our talents, we enjoy life, we have pleasures, can be to do with romance, but also where we can demonstrate our artistry, creativity and flair. But this event is the outcome of the solar eclipse, which was on the 14th of October last year, also in Libra. And if you feel at this time you're not really in touch with some of those things that are important to you as an individual, it may be time for a reset, because the Sun has now moved, joining with your ruler Mercury, the North Node and Chiron, into your sector of future hopes and plans. And if you're not really aligned with the things that you feel really passionate about yourself, then for sure some attention needs to be applied to try to fine-tune things in the way that you want. And one of the best ways to do that, to be honest, is going to be through time management. Because over this week, I feel that you are going to be in demand. But late last week, Mars, the planet of passion, made its way to the top of your horoscope and is going to give you a tremendous amount of drive, but also ability to raise your profile in the following 6 weeks. Don't be surprised if your professional situation is linked to the creativity that this eclipse is bringing to the fore. Also, Venus at the top of your chart late last week forged a gorgeous angle to Jupiter, the planet of fortune. In fact, in traditional astrology, Venus is also a planet of fortune, known as the lesser benefit. But they're still in touch through to the middle of this week. Your ability to cultivate professional contacts is really very strong, especially as Neptune in that area is linking magnificently to your ruler Mercury. Now, Mercury has gone into its pre-retrograde shadow, but that instinctive link between the two can really guide you in a very positive way through this week. Now, as the week develops, Venus moves forwards and connects to Uranus, the planet of the unexpected, the planet of freedom. And of course, Uranus has been creating some issues, I feel, for Geminis over the last 5 or 6 years. A lot of nervous energy, tension, finding it difficult at times to sleep. But what you can gain from Venus applying to Uranus is listen to your instincts, 1, but 2, don't underestimate all the past experiences and skills that you've accumulated, but how they could be defined or refined in a fresh way now. And those instincts that Jupiter and Uranus together, particularly by the end of this week, are prompting you to take note of, can be directed towards your professional situation. So as much as the gathering of energy in Aries is very much about your social world, your networking, your future plans, there's a lot of energy in Pisces which is pushing you to take seriously your talents. But critically, if you feel you can't express the more creative part of your talents, and it's only by really fitting in with someone else's template that you can prosper, that may be something that you may want to push back against. If on the other hand, you're quite comfortable in your current work situation, this could be a time when much more acknowledgement and praise and recognition come your way. It's been a pleasure being with you, Gemini. Thank you so much for joining me. If you've yet to subscribe, I'd be honoured if you did now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Welcome, Cancer, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun, or the Moon. This week begins with that mighty event of the penumbral lunar eclipse in the sign of Libra. But we had a solar eclipse in that sign last October, and this lunar eclipse is the outcome of that period, which gave you an opportunity to set your intentions about where you lived, who you lived with and how, or around shaping your environment in any part of your situation, but most of all encouraging you to be in touch with how things feel, which of course is something that you have a gift for, but sometimes that can get lost in all the pressures and competing demands that modern life tends to throw at us. So as we begin this week with the cluster of energy in the sign of Aries, including the Sun and Mercury, and of course also the North Node and Chiron, they're asking you to think about your connection to the wider world, but it's important that that connection is one that you're comfortable with. So as much as that solar eclipse last October was at a more personal level, how it's playing out at the moment may be how you feel in terms of the recognition you have, the respect you have from others, what your professional situation is like. Are you working in an environment which is supportive or alienates you? And these are big questions to grapple with at this particular time. But what's going to help you, Cancer, is late last week, Mars, the planet of drive, of passion, moved into your 9th house. Now, you've had a lot of energy in the 9th house recently, but some of it has been tricky energy because, of course, Saturn's there and the Sun applied to Neptune, and there may have been some confusion about certain issues. But Mars moving into your 9th house is going to give you a lot of extra fire when it comes to being adventurous, independent, going towards any travel plans, and really finding the extra motivation around that. It's possible too, around your professional situation, that you are attracted at this time to do something completely different and fresh. And especially if you're not feeling very fulfilled at that more emotional level. So there's a lot to calibrate this week. Also, late last week, there was a glorious link between Venus in your 9th house and Jupiter in your 11th. Is there one friend that you have a connection with that is really, really supportive? It may be that you have a shared interest in a hobby. It may be around a cause. It's possible that you may even think about heading off somewhere at the start of this week with someone, whether it is having a day out or going somewhere for a longer haul vacation. It's a really brilliant time to do that for sure. But as this week goes on, Venus starts to apply to Uranus in your sector of the long term and also your friendships. And something could happen in a very quick way which has some providence attached to it. So some good fortune is definitely a possibility this week, even if you are trying to toggle between how things feel and how you need to apply your energies in the outer part of your life activities. So the big takeout, I feel, is that if things aren't working for you, there's enough thrust in your 9th house of change and enough energy to give you the extra confidence to change things up if you need to do that. Also, by the end of the week, Jupiter and Uranus start to edge closer together within 3 degrees. They're going to come into an exact alliance on the 21st of April. But Mercury, the planet of communication, is in its pre-retrograde shadow phase now, but it's supported quite magnificently by Neptune. So even if your professional situation isn't moving quite at the pace you want, just know that your instincts are likely to be very reliable, and that obviously can feed into the communications that you have. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Cancer. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great week. If you've yet to subscribe, I'd be honoured if you did now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Welcome, Leo, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. If we cast our minds back to the solar eclipse of the 14th of October last year, it was in the sign of Libra, very much about balance, about equity, but also because it's an air sign about communication. And for you, that's house 3. That's quick communication, anything to do with technology, your interests, sharing ideas, developing new ways of approaching things. It can also be your connection to your neighborhood, your neighbors, or even siblings. Now, at the start of this week, with the penumbral lunar eclipse in the same sign, you can assess how that particular eclipse last October has worked for you. For example, if you don't feel very heard, this can be a time when you may feel that you're going to have to change tack somewhat in order to gain the recognition for the things that you're trying to shake up. But also because we now have a cluster of energy in the sign of Aries, which shares your fire element and is very much to do with adventure, travel, higher ideals, and really broadening your existence. Some of those everyday details that you've been working on may need to transform in some ways to help you to connect to that bigger picture possibility. Now, on the screen now, I'm sharing your event chart, and you can see that Pluto, the planet of change, is right on your 7th house cusp. This is where we connect to others. So people are going to be feeling your power at this time, but look at the position of the Sun at 4 degrees 49. They're in sextile. The sextile was exact last week on the 21st, but they're still in contact with one another in a way which gives you an enormous amount of thrust. But I feel an ambition to bolster your boundaries and your interactions with others with a lot more determination. And of course, language and communication is all part of that process. So if you feel at some level that someone's withholding some of the exciting ideas that are stimulating you, or not really pitching in and being particularly open to you, that's just going to increase your desire to push forwards. And you can see right at the top of your chart, Jupiter and Uranus are in house 10. They're going to come into contact by the end of this week within 3 degrees and exactly into conjunction on the 21st of April for the first time in 14 years. But if you recall, last week, Mars, the planet of desire, moved out of your sector of relating on Friday and into the 8th house. Now, Mars in the 8th house, despite the host Pisces being potentially quite gentle, the 8th house has a very scorpionic vibe. So it is very much to do with desire. And it's going to be in this location right through to the end of April. And Mars, therefore, is going to give you more thrust, particularly around your desire to improve your financial situation. So if you're in business or you'd like to go into business, you're going to have a lot more spark as you go forwards. But those planets in your 10th house suggest that being open-minded and fresh in your approach, being innovative, is going to be an important part of your prospects. And right at the end of last week, Venus, also like Mars in your 8th house, connected with Jupiter in the most perfect of ways. These are the two planets of fortune. And I think it's possible some good news developed for you as last week came to a close, but there can be more of it through the first 3 days of this week because they're still in touch. And then Venus connects to Uranus. So Uranus over the last 5 or 6 years has been encouraging you to change things up in terms of your professional situation. If you've resisted that so far, it's going to get much harder to resist now because your prospects are so good, but also your desire to be more expansive is really triggered by this particular lunar eclipse, especially, as I say, if you don't feel heard. Now, Mercury, the planet of communication, is also in its pre-retrograde shadow, but forges a semi-sextile to Neptune, which, like Venus and Mars, is in your 8th house. That's just saying to you, when you're exchanging information or talking about ideas, really important to still listen to your hunches. Now later on this week, Venus is going to go face to face with Black Moon Lilith. It's an interesting aspect, to be honest, because with all that gathering of energy in your 8th house, the intimate side of your life, if it's working well, can bring a lot of closeness and some spiritual transformations and of course enjoyment. But if you're in a situation where you and a partner see finances very differently, or one of you isn't so happy being up close and personal, that may be something that does need to be discussed before this week comes to a close. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Leo. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great week. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Welcome, Virgo, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. I'm sharing on the screen now your event chart, and you can see Mars is right on the 7th house cusp in the sign of Pisces, where he arrived last Friday. Now Mars is going to be here through to the end of April, and is going to help you to assert your boundaries in a very positive way. Now Saturn has been in this area since last March 2023, and it may not have always been easy around certain interactions. Now you can feel feistier, more self-confident about saying what you want, and that's going to be really important this week, because the week begins with the penumbral lunar eclipse in your 2nd solar house of Libra, which is very much about your self-worth, but also your values and critically everyday money. But if we go back to last October the 14th, when we had the solar eclipse in Libra, that helped you to set your intentions around those areas. It's just that Uranus was forging a jagged angle to the eclipse and Neptune a rather draining one. And it's possible that you found it a little bit difficult to get the collaboration and cooperation you'd like from someone that you've needed to interact with. Now, this could be a colleague, it could be a boss, it could be a bank, it may even be in a romantic dimension. But the lunar eclipse at the start of this week brings all of these issues up to the boil. And if it does feel that the ins and outs around your finances, or the dialogue around discussing your finances, is blunted and not flowing as well as it could, I feel that what Mars can do is help you to protect yourself, but also to assert yourself with a great deal of authority. But also, as last week came to a close, there was a glorious link between Venus in your 7th house of relating and Jupiter in your 9th house of travel and widening your horizons. If you did meet someone at this time, it could be that you're actually going to show a little bit more of the push in order to be the go-getter because of Mars moving into your 7th house. But a connection now, and I don't mean just in a romantic context, could prove to be very fortunate. So if you decide to travel somewhere with a friend or a partner, it could, even if you put the plan in motion now and don't exactly go, or if you actually head off this week through to Wednesday, it could be a really lovely time to do so. Now, of course, your ruler Mercury can influence travel when it's in retrograde, and it's in its pre-retrograde shadow at the moment, but for you in the 8th house where the Sun is, and Chiron and the North Node. So they are asking you to think about what you share with other people, but also what you'd like to transform in your life. But you can get some good advice. Neptune is applying to Mercury, and if there is someone caring and supportive who understands your situation, they can, with sensitivity, make some very good suggestions. Also, Venus in your 7th house forges an electric link with Uranus, which becomes exact on Thursday. If you are single, something could happen quite quickly this week. Maybe it's a date, maybe you're going to connect with someone, maybe you'll have just a little magical moment, you know, when you're going in and out of a store and someone catches your eye. That type of thing can be really exciting. Now, if you are in a settled relationship, I think a lot of the dialogue this week could be about money, but it may also be about your desire to be heard more, because the 7th house energy that you have means that since Saturn moved there last year, if you feel that a partner hasn't been able to tune into your needs quite as much, again, Mars gives you more assertion, but Venus the charm, and Neptune the guile, in order to articulate yourself very skillfully. But Pluto, of course, moved on the 21st of January into your 6th house of work, physical health and fitness, diet, nutrition, and it is forging a very strong link with the Sun at the start of this week. So maybe the good fortune for you this week could be something to do with a job application. And the more open-minded you are, and being open to travel, for example, or learn new skills, they're blessed, all those strands, by the alliance between Uranus and Jupiter, which tightens up as this week draws to a close and comes within 3 degrees. They come into an exact conjunction on the 21st of April for the first time in 14 years. This time, Mars is going to be connecting to them very, very helpfully. So if there's part of you that didn't quite, from that solar eclipse last year, break out and be more adventurous in quite the way you wanted, perhaps because you've really put security, foundations, and keeping your finances safe, there is going to be part of you developing as you go into April that may find you a lot more risk-taking, and perhaps it's about a job, maybe a relationship, that's going to start to show up from this week. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Virgo. I hope you have a great week. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Welcome, Libra, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm sharing your event chart at midnight on Monday. And you can see the Moon is in your sign, preparing to go into the opposition with the Sun with the penumbral lunar eclipse. It's the only penumbral lunar eclipse this year, and critically, of course, you can see the South Node is in your sign as well. This hasn't happened for 37 years, so not a very frequent event for sure. But let's just revisit the solar eclipse in your sign of last October, because that gave you an opportunity to set your intentions as an individual, to not be so concerned about tuning into others, which you have so much of a gift for, and being more single-minded about what you needed to achieve in the following 6 months, because this lunation is an opportunity to test and measure how far you've come. Now, if you have felt deflected, it wouldn't be a complete surprise, because Uranus, the planet of change and disruption, forged an awkward angle to that eclipse, as did Neptune. Uranus may have made it difficult for you to totally focus on your own needs because of the energy of someone you're closely connected to, or financial issues may have also had quite a bearing as well. And Neptune may have been affecting your physical vitality, not least because there seem to be lots of demands and lots of needs that others have wanted you to fulfill. So as you reach this event with the Sun and obviously the stack of other energies in the sign of Aries, the North Node, Chiron and Mercury, all in your 7th house, it would be easy to just keep focusing on the people pleasing. But it's important to check out that what you want from your life is still of primary importance and isn't being deflected too much. So that's really what I feel is the key at the start of this week. And what's going to help you enormously is Mars, because Mars last week moved out of a very creative and quite sexy part of your scope where he'd been for 6 weeks, and he's moved into Pisces, not Mars's favourite location, can be quite reflective and can have a tendency to rake up old hurts and angers, but for you it's the 6th house. So I feel that what this will be doing for you is giving you quite the boost when it comes to your stamina. Because of course Saturn's been in your 6th house since last March 23, Neptune since 2012, and they have been draining. Mars is going to help you to set your boundaries more, particularly around what you will or won't agree to do for others. It's also going to make you much more aware of exercise. If you're someone who embraces physical exercise in your life, this will just help you to focus it in perhaps a slightly different way, but it gives you a lot of thrust. Also, as last week came to a close, Venus, your ruler in the same sector as Mars, your 6th house, applied brilliantly to Jupiter, the planet of opportunities, in your 8th house, which is those shared finances that I feel Uranus has been disrupting over the last 6 months. So it's possible the sacrifice and hard work that you've been investing can give you a reward, and that influence is still alive through to the middle of this week. Then Venus connects to Uranus, the other planet that had been causing the mischief, but in a very positive way. So by approaching your finances, but also your work, with that desire to help people and be of assistance, but just with a fresh view, maybe something that's felt stuck can be reconfigured in a new, more imaginative way, and someone can think you're absolutely brilliant because you're providing a solution that helps them. But you do have that stack of energy in house 7, which is about your relationships. If a relationship needs some work, or you'd like to bring a relationship into your world, or your relationship with yourself is your primary importance, you've got lots of opportunities to work on all of that over the next month particularly. But look at the position of the Sun right on your 7th house cusp, but then look at the position of Pluto. Now they connected to one another in an exact sextile last Thursday, but they're still in touch as we start this week. The critical thing is the Sun and Pluto can trigger transformations. Some of those can be inside of us in terms of our approach. Sometimes it can be in our outer world. But having the Sun in your 7th house, a very dynamic location for it, in the fiery sign of Aries, connecting with Pluto in your 5th house, where you can demonstrate your flair, your artistry, your creativity, but also where you yearn for romance, that connection can be very positive this week for relationships. Now Mercury is in its pre-retrograde shadow. It's going to go retrograde on the 1st of April, but it's also augmented really well this week by Neptune. That compassionate side of your nature, which Neptune has been accentuating since 2012, you can still use that, but I think Mercury helps you, along with the Sun, the Node, less so Chiron, but certainly those 3 players can help you just to reinforce your boundaries, which I feel still continues to be an essential part of the story. But on Wednesday, Venus, your ruler, does go face to face with Black Moon Lilith. If you're in a long-standing relationship, maybe your partner could spring a little bit of a surprise upon you about something that they're not entirely happy about. But you know, it's much more likely to be to do with the domestic scene or some issue that they feel that you've not been quite as thoughtful or aware of as they would like. But remember, this penumbral lunar eclipse is reminding you of the need to stand in your power. You can work with other people very effectively. That's your great talent. But if you are in any way deprecating your right to have your voice, do the things that are individually important to you, which may mean being more independent, the moon in your sign, along with that south node, is saying, look, if there's habitual ways of being about leaning into other people's needs and not considering what you want from situations, this is definitely a time to push back on that and hold what you need from situations very tightly. Now, by the end of this week, Jupiter and Uranus tighten together within 3 degrees. That's going to go on through to the end of the first week of May. They come into an exact conjunction on the 21st of April, and they're going to be supported by Mars as well. Now, they're in your 8th house. If there has been something that's been quite a challenge around shared or business finances over the last few years with Uranus in your 8th house, Jupiter's been providing support since last May, but when you get to the 21st of April, you can really assess how far you've come. And the solar eclipse, which is going to occur on the 8th in the north and 9th in the south, in Aries, is going to give you an awesome opportunity to really fire up those skills you have around relating, but it's still important to stand in your power, and the outcome will be shown by that 3rd week in April. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Libra. Thank you so much for joining me. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Welcome, Scorpio, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. I'm sharing on the screen now your event chart, and the big news story really for you particularly is that your traditional ruler Mars has moved into your 5th house. That happened late last week, but that's an area that really can give you a lot of extra thrust over the next 6 weeks, and that is very exciting for your social situation, which, to be honest, Saturn and Neptune have been draining a little bit, particularly over the last year in terms of Saturn. But also late last week, Venus in this area forged a delicious link to Jupiter, the planet of fortune. If you did meet up with someone as last week came to a close, there may have been quite the connection, and that positivity can come into this new week as well. They're still in touch through to Wednesday, but then it's Uranus that is connected to Venus. So in existing relationships, a fresh approach, more energy, more enthusiasm can reinvigorate a long-standing alliance. But of course, as we come into this week, we are having the penumbral lunar eclipse, and you can see the moon and the south node for you are in house 12, which is very psychological. The sun on the other side of the heavens is in the practical house 6, along with the north node, Chiron, Mercury as well. But the critical thing with this particular event is that it's the outcome of the solar eclipse, which occurred on the 14th of October last year. And that saw a very sensitive position for the sun and the moon, pushing you really to be much more conscious of the shadow side of your nature, perhaps the things that you were more fearful about, perhaps things that were undermining your confidence or your physical energy. And Uranus and Neptune applied to that event in not a very helpful way. So it may be the unpredictability of someone in your world since then has affected you. It may be that you've felt a little bit disillusioned with some of the more creative parts of your situation. So as we come into this penumbral lunar eclipse, you can assess how much progress you made in the area that solar eclipse wanted you to embrace, which was those hidden, more shadow, more psychological strands of your situation. If you really embraced it and your personal development has come on during that period of time, you may see real positive progress which you can celebrate. But the cluster of energy in house 6 in Aries could also be telling you that a lot of your situation at the moment is dominated by more practical demands, whether it's work, the domestic sphere, supporting other people potentially. And if all of that is seeing you not have the time to get the rest, reflection and recuperation that is important for us all, that's what you need to adjust over the next few weeks. But the great news is that Mars, moving into your 5th house, is going to give you the vigour to do that. Also, if you do want to push back and change things at home, if you're the one who's been the primary manager of the domestic load, Your other ruler, Pluto, your modern ruler, you can see is on house 4, and that connects with the sun at the start of this week within 3 degrees. And that's giving you a lot of determination to speak up for what you need. So if other people need to pitch in and take a bit more responsibility, then do ensure you find your voice. But in terms of that social dimension, if your world is working well for you and you do want to connect with other people, Mars and Venus forging very positive influences for you this week for sure. Venus then goes on to connect to Uranus later in the week. Uranus, which has been causing some mischief, certainly some unpredictability, perhaps your own mood or need to be close or need to be then free, has been something that's caused some tensions over the last 5 or 6 years. Well, I feel that you're going to sort a lot of that out in the next 2 or 3 weeks as Jupiter and Uranus come into an alliance on the 21st of April, an exact conjunction, but as they do, they're going to be connecting to Mars in your 5th house. So Uranus can be an agent for change in a positive way. So if you've needed to flex, approach things with a fresh eye and be open to different people, then Uranus has been helpful, but Jupiter will reinforce that help by the 21st of April, but they do start to come into touch with one another by the end of this week. So a lot for you to go for, but I feel essentially, Scorpio, making sure that your physical, practical and responsibility side of your life isn't dominating that more emotional and more sensitive part of your nature is really, really important. So if you do feel a bit overwhelmed, do use the power of Mars and Pluto, your 2 rulers, to push back, assert your boundaries, but also give yourself permission to have some fun. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Scorpio. I really hope you have a great week. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Welcome Sagittarius, your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm showing your event chart at midnight as we go into the new week. And we can see that the Moon has just moved into the sign of Libra, which for you is house 11. The Moon's obviously about how we feel about things, but it's also our need for protection, security, and it's in a house 11. It's asking you as it comes into the opposition with the Sun, and we have the penumbral lunar eclipse, to really think about whether you as an individual, the position of the Sun in Aries, is manifesting your desires in a way which fits your long-term plan, the position of the Moon, or are you being deflected by the needs of friends and associates a little bit too much? Of course, since we had the solar eclipse in Libra last October the 14th, that gave you a chance to think about your long-term plans, your network and your social interaction, but did it all go quite to plan? Because that particular event was afflicted by the restless energies of Uranus, work, and the draining influence of Neptune, emotion. So I'm not sure that you got the total uplift from last October's eclipse, and this lunar eclipse can help you to assess things. Maybe one of the drawdowns from it is that you do need to manage your time a little more effectively, particularly if you feel you have been caught up in helping and supporting other people. Uranus, since it's been in Taurus for you the last 6 years, has probably provided quite a lot of change, sometimes some big stimulation, but possibly a lot of disruption in your daily routines. Now, you may have learnt a lot of new skills, perhaps to do with technology, or you're showcasing your abilities in a fresh way from where you were at the start of that process. But if it has felt that it has been impacting all this change and disruption, your ability to be more interactive and playful, that's one of the things you're going to want to change from the coming solar eclipse, which occurs on the 8th of April in your 5th house, or the 9th if you're in the southern hemisphere. But the other thing to tell you, as much as Uranus has been an agent of change, sometimes positively, sometimes challengingly, it is coming in to a conjunction by the end of this week within 3 degrees with Jupiter, your ruler. And that becomes exact on the 21st of April. So if you've done a lot of slogging away in terms of rejigging your approach, rewards will come by then. Also, you can see on the screen that Pluto is just in your 3rd house, but because the Sun moved last week with the spring vernal equinox into Aries, they're still pretty much in touch and a sextile. Now that's one of the best aspects you can have in astrology. It can create inner change, or we can change our outer environment, but of course Pluto is about transformation. But the Sun in the 5th house is about showcasing your individual talents. And another thing that this penumbral lunar eclipse could flag up, are you in some ways diluting your showcasing of those gifts because you're caught up in supporting others rather too much? And that may be another thing that you want to reset. But what can help you clearly is the role of Mars, because late last week on Friday, Mars made its way into Pisces, where it will be through to the end of April. Now, it's not its best location in terms of sign or house, because Mars in the 4th house can be a bit grumpy and grouchy and defensive. It's a kind of Mars in Cancer energy. But what it can do is reinforce the more restrictive energies of Saturn and the more draining energies of Neptune, which have been such a challenging dimension for you recently. And also, Mars, as it makes its way through Pisces, is going to make you determined to get other people to take a bit more responsibility around the domestic load. So if you have been doing too much, whether it's at work, whether it's socially, checking in on people, or it is to do with the home environment, this is a time with Mars's help to set your boundaries more firmly. And that is something to be gained. But certainly because Venus and Jupiter are still in touch through to Wednesday of this week, something good, some good news could come up around a property matter, or maybe it is around a job, especially if you do work in your locality, provide a support service in an emotional context, such as being a counsellor, therapist, a healer, alternative practitioner, a psychic, an astrologer. Something good, some good news can emerge by the middle of this week when Venus then applies to Uranus. But to get that piece of good news, it does require an ability to flex. Uranus in Taurus can be a bit resistant to that because it's a fixed sign, but something could occur which you need to make a quick decision on, and if you do, it could actually be very, very positive for you. Now, the other thing to tell you is that Mercury is now in its pre-retrograde shadow. By the end of this week, it will be going retrograde. But the good news is it's forging a semi-sextile to Neptune. Listen to your instincts, even about the creative stuff. It will guide you. But the big reset this week is making sure that you're not getting too scattered in dealing with everyone else's needs in a way which diminutes your need to showcase your star quality, which is what the cluster of energy in Aries is about. But at the same time, you'll probably want to honour and support your friendships. So that means properly explaining your situation and why it's been more difficult for you to be as interactive as you would like the last 6 months, but also being a bit sterner about other people taking more notice of your personal situation and the demands you have, and getting them to tune in and support you where needed. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Sagittarius. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a great week. If you've yet to subscribe, please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Welcome, Capricorn, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm showing your event chart right at the start of the week, and you can see the moon is up there on the 10th house cusp in the sign of Libra. Later on Monday, it will go directly opposite with the penumbral lunar eclipse, the sun in Aries in your 4th house. The 4th house is very much to do with your home, emotional environment, your need to have security, but also it's where you need to perhaps grapple with the more emotional dimension of your situation, which is a contradiction in a way, because of course that's what the moon's about. So having the moon in such a visible location at the start of this week suggests it's going to be difficult to disguise how you feel. So if you're having a great week, everyone will know. If you're feeling more vulnerable, to you at least, it will feel that everyone can see that, even if perhaps not all people will be that perceptive. Now also up there near the moon is the south node. So that's the habitual energies. But if we see the big picture and go back to last October, we had a solar eclipse in Libra, which for you is very much about ambition, goals, setting your targets high. Characteristics that are very much broadly in keeping with the energy of your sign. How's it gone? Because when that solar eclipse occurred, it was conflicted by the disruptive energies of Uranus, the 5th house, very much to do with wanting to be creative, as well as needing to fit into the structures, not just that you like, but what other people expect of you, which is what the 10th house solar eclipse was about. But also Neptune applied to that event as well in a dreamy way. So your thinking at times may have felt a little bit fuzzy. And also your ruler Saturn since March 23 has been in your 3rd house. So your interactions at times may have seemed a bit stilted. It may have been more difficult to find your voice. And of course, the sign of Libra is about communication. It's about balance. It's about making sure that those goals and ambitions that you had worked for you in an interactive way where you felt listened to, because that's very Libran energy. So as we get to this event, how did it go in terms of those ambitions? Did you get everything you wanted? Do you feel celebrated in terms of your feelings as much as your craft, your skills? That is the big question for this week's event, the lunar eclipse. If something does feel out of kilter between the work, the position of the moon, and life, the position of the sun, balance, this is a time to realign things. But as last week came to a close, there were a couple of really encouraging things to support you. The first was that the movement of the sun into your 4th house with the vernal equinox was supported by the position of Pluto in your 2nd house. Now they're still in touch in a sextile as this week begins, just about. Pluto's really encouraging you to transform your attitude to values, self-worth, money. But because the sun and Pluto in a sextile is very positive in terms of transforming, it can be in terms of our inner world, the sun in the 4th house, or in terms of our material world. And so something around where you live or around your emotional attitude to money or your value could have improved from that relationship last Thursday when it was exact, but even as this week begins. Now the second thing that happened was that Mars moved into Pisces last Friday. It's going to be here through to the end of April. And the limitation that Saturn particularly has been applying over the last year is fenced off a little bit. Mars is pushing back on that, giving you more energy and thrust in terms of saying how you feel. And finally, Venus, like Mars in Pisces, was forging a beautiful link to Jupiter as last week came to a close, and a potentially very lucky one. And you can see that Jupiter is in the 5th house, where you can be more playful, more ebullient, more bubbly, more creative, enjoy life's pleasures, And because Venus is in the third house, there may have been a conversation towards the end of last week that gave you some uplift. If you didn't have it, it can still happen this week through to Wednesday. But even then, by Thursday, Venus applies to Uranus in your fifth house. Something unexpected. It could be a text message, an email, just a connection you have with someone that really can be enlivening. Now, of course, Venus can be about money, but also about relating. And the fifth house can be about romance. So a flirty exchange is possible, but if you're in an existing relationship, a great opportunity to have a frank chat. Mars is going to give you more encouragement to say how you feel, and perhaps there are some fresh approaches that you and a partner could take to reinvigorate the spark between you. So that's all good stuff. Now, Venus does clash with Black Moon Lilith at the heart of the week. For you, that could be an issue, I think, where maybe if your point of view doesn't quite correlate with someone that you're attracted to, particularly if you feel that other person's a bit picky, because obviously Black Moon Lilith is in Virgo, and that can be a bit perfectionist, but still I feel it can be talked through. Now, talking of talking, Mercury, the planet of talk and thought, continues in your fourth house, where it does struggle a little bit more to find its outlet, and it is in its pre-retrograde shadow, but it does forge a beautiful link to Neptune. So your instinctive gut feeling on situations, particularly around home and emotional matters or family affairs, is probably going to be on the money. So this lunar eclipse is certainly asking you to think very carefully about making sure that balance between your need for recognition, validation, success, to fulfill your goals is working for you at an emotional level. If it isn't, maybe a job needs to shift, maybe your attitude needs to alter somewhat, but there's a lot of good stuff this week, Capricorn, to support you for sure. It's been a real pleasure being with you. I do hope you have a lovely week. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Welcome, Aquarius, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now is the event chart for the very start of the week. The big takeout is that the Moon is in the 9th house, very much to do with a need for freedom and space, which you have an appreciation for. The South Node's up there too. Later on Monday, the Moon moves forwards and goes into a direct opposition with the Sun, and we have the penumbral lunar eclipse. But I want you to think back to the Libra solar eclipse of last October the 14th, because that gave you an opportunity to set your intentions around finding a balance, Libra, and equity, Libra, being heard, Libra, but also in your relationships, feeling that you can have a little bit of space, Libra. But that event was compromised by your modern ruler Uranus, a helter-skelter influence in your home and emotional sector, which has meant that perhaps demands in the domestic or family sphere have impacted on your desire to learn things or to explore or to travel or to just be free. But also Neptune, the planet of dreams, has been in your sector of everyday finance, as has your traditional ruler of Saturn. So money's got a bit tighter, I feel, but there may have been a lot of demands in terms of where you live or supporting people, or your own emotional needs may have been a little bit up and down. So perhaps with this lunar eclipse, we have an opportunity to assess the impact of that solar eclipse. Did you get everything you need, or did Uranus and Neptune really put a proverbial spanner in the works? I think it's possible. So with this event, with the Sun being in your third house, which is your everyday communicational sector, and your desire to express yourself quickly and passionately, and also linking fabulously at the start of this week with Pluto in your sign, Your desire to manifest what you need as an individual and express it with conviction is very strong. The two came into an exact alliance last Thursday, but then on Friday, if you recall, Mars made its way out of your sign and into Pisces. Now, although Mars in Pisces is not the greatest match, it's going to be there through to the end of April, and it is going to give you a huge amount of extra impetus and drive to sort out any pressing financial matters that Saturn has been creating over the last year. But also in Pisces is, of course, Venus. And Venus is the planet of money as well as relating. So in the second house and in a sign that it's exalted in, Venus can bring some better things to pass for you. And at the end of last week forged a dazzling alliance to Jupiter. They're still in touch through to the middle of this week. So a slice of good news linked to your property or your personal finances can emerge this week. Also, Uranus, your modern ruler, that is connected to by Venus by Thursday, and approaching an old situation that's felt a bit stuck with a fresh pair of eyes may unlock a solution. Now, obviously, because Venus can be about sensuality in the second house, if in a romantic situation, if you live with someone, if things have got a little bit too caught up with the demand side of things rather than the enjoyment side of things, using that part of your nature which can be quite inventive to do something different to surprise a partner can put the spark back in the relationship. But the big collective that's in Aries is really powerful, and one of those influences is Mercury, the planet of communication, and in the third house that has a very Gemini feel. So your thinking can be very, very quick. Yes, Mercury's in its pre-retrograde shadow, but it actually forges a very intuitive link to Neptune all through the week, a semi-sextile. So that's good. And then by the end of the week, Jupiter and Uranus inch closer together within 3 degrees in that home zone. So if you have been feeling very unsettled about where you live or around the family dimension over the last 5 or 6 years, perhaps you've moved like we have 3 times, or perhaps you felt a bit cramped for space, or you're okay where you're living for space, but the environment is not good for you. It's noisy, disruptive, lots of traffic, or conversely, it's too quiet, too detached from connection to others. So whatever challenges there have been around your family or home or emotional situation, by the 21st of April, Jupiter and Uranus come together in an exact alliance for the first time in 14 years, but they're forging a good link to Mars. So if you're wanting to do some more changes to where you live, make some more improvements, and you're looking for some money to do it, something can ensue between now and then, which actually gives you the resources to do what you wish, which is really, really exciting. So this is a week, essentially, when you're going to be a lot stronger and more single-minded about money. You can have a lot more determination to find solutions. You can have a stroke of fortune. You can be very persuasive if you're trying to express your ideas to people. And if a desire to learn some new information or go on a course or a travel plan did get disrupted over the last 6 months, this lunar eclipse can help you to devise the plan to get yourself back on course, but it may require some immediate everyday communication in order to get the ball rolling. But by the time we get to the solar eclipse in Libra of the 2nd of October, which is going to be conjunct Mercury in a really positive way, what you set in motion now, and with the solar eclipse of the 8th or the 9th of April, if you're in the southern hemisphere, that can provide the solutions, provide the prep for getting you to where you really want to be in the last 3 months of 2024. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Aquarius. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a great week. And if you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Come Pisces, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 25th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. Now, late last week, Mars made its way into your sign. That's an absolutely fantastic development. So on the screen now, I'm sharing your event chart and you can see Mars right up on your first house. That's going to give your physical vitality a big lift. If you have been feeling drained recently because of having Saturn in your sign, this is going to counteract that. Not necessarily entirely, particularly when they come together, which will be between the 16th and the 14th of April. But it does give you an opportunity to get more on the front foot, so that's very welcome. Also, just to tell you that late last week, Venus in your sign, which has given you a huge amount of extra allure, forged a very lucky link to Jupiter in your third house. Third house can be to do with tickets. I'm not telling you what to do. But if you are someone who has the budget and enjoys a little bit of a flutter, that energy is coming into the middle of this week. So that's real nice as well. So generally Mars, Venus in your own sign, despite the more limiting and sometimes doubting energy that Saturn can create, they can give you a much greater and more robust sense of yourself, your identity, and just give you a real pep when it comes to how you judge your own appearance. Now, of course, we've got a big event as this week begins, as the moon goes opposite the sun with the penumbral lunar eclipse. So for you, you can see the moon is up in house 8, that's shared finances, resources. It's also where we're most invested. The moon in house 8 can be a bit nervous. But for you, of course, the sign of Libra in house 8 is about trying to find a balance, feeling heard, because it's the sign of communication, it's an air sign, around shared finances. But the 8th house can also be about intimacy. But if we wind back to last October the 14th, when we had the solar eclipse in Libra, that gave you an opportunity to set your intentions in a really positive way. If you want to be more entrepreneurial, if you want to buy your own property, if you want to move your resources around in a very shrewd way in terms of long-term financial planning, shares, pensions, all that kind of good stuff is the 8th house. But the 8th house is also about transitions and transformations, of course. But how's it gone? How's that last period of time since last October worked out for you? Have you seen progress around your long-term finances, around your earnings? Do you feel that your connections to others are respectful and are worthy of your devotion and investment of time and energy? Only you can answer that question, but the lunar eclipse is really pushing you to evaluate, because it occurs in terms of the sun in your second house. That's your self-worth. That's your everyday money. That's your personal values, not where you connect to someone else. So if you feel the connections to someone else have been less successful since then, it may be time to take back a little bit more autonomy. So if you've really been trying to make a relationship work, we all know the sign of Libra, very much about relationships, and you've really been wanting the real deal, because the 8th house isn't the conversation, it's really where we mean it. It's where we're properly devoted. And if a devotion is not being respected or treated in the way you want, that could see you, this event could see you thinking very carefully about a reset. But in a more pragmatic way, it could just be about balancing the ins and outs in your finances. So the 8th house can be things that we might buy on hire purchase, or it could be a mortgage that have a longer accumulative effect on us, whereas the second house might be our decision of what to buy in terms of our groceries, or maybe even that flutter in the week that you're in. So that's what you may have to evaluate. But I feel, because when that solar eclipse happened, Uranus in your third house, everyday conversation, and Neptune in your own sign weren't forging a very good relationship to it. So it's possible you haven't got exactly what you hope to get. So Mars moving into your sign can give you the strength to break away from a cloying, possessive, clingy situation. It doesn't have to be romantically. It could just be a friend or a colleague at work who just always seems to assume that you've got the solutions, or you're there to provide the psychological support, 8th house, to prop up how they're feeling. If something isn't working at any level, Mars arriving in your sign late last week gives you a lot more thrust to really portion off the parts of life that you want to retain complete autonomy over, your agency, as they say these days. So as you come into this week, the other thing to take out from it is that Pluto in house 12 forged a very deep alliance with the Sun last Thursday, the 21st, the sextile, which is really positive. With the Sun in your second house, if we're thinking about your self-value, are you factoring in your ability to see into situations very psychologically? If you're only seeing a situation in terms of the material plane, which is the 2nd and 8th houses in the practical guise, and not in the more psychological sense, that angle between Pluto and the Sun at the start of this week is saying, look, you're one of the shrewdest cookies. Yes, you can give and give and give to a person or a cause or a business for a long time, but then, you know, the accumulative experience you have can then see you realize that it's not being honored or respected, and you can see it. You can sometimes see it when you're doing it, but don't underestimate your psychological perceptions. Also, Neptune, your ruler, forges a very good link this week with Mercury, although that's in its pre-retrograde shadow. If you are thinking about financial matters, that encourages you to continue to tune into how things feel instinctively. Now, by the end of this week, your ruler, your traditional ruler, Jupiter, tightens up in a alliance with Uranus within 3 degrees. They become exact on the 21st of April and are going to be supported by Mars in your sign. It's a sensational connection because it's the first between them exactly in a conjunction for 14 years. But because Taurus is earth and you're water, earth supports water elementally. So Mars being in your sign is going to give you the thrust to communicate your ideas, Uranus, perhaps new and different ideas, with a confidence, Jupiter, that could prove to be really lucky. So a lot of good stuff is building up at this present time. It's just assessing how the outcome from the solar eclipse plays out with this lunar eclipse, because that's essentially down to your own personal assessment. And if something isn't quite working, whether it is practically in terms of money, or whether it is in terms of a deep connection, sensually or sexually or emotionally, only you can really decide. But Mars being in your sign gives you a lot more self-belief to do what's right for you. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Pisces. Thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you have a great week. And if you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol.